Hey everyone, and welcome to Geometry Dash 2.2. In today's tutorial I'm going to teach you how to make a basic platformer level with all the features that you see in like the tower, for example. We're going to learn how to build and set up the amount of coins that you want in your level, and of course we're going to learn how to make different checkpoints that will respawn you and other things like that. So let's get into it. I've made this tutorial basically just as easy as possible for you to just follow along with me and build it right next to me. We're not going to be adding any decoration or stuff like that, just building a basic skeleton of a platformer level for you to edit to your liking. So let's get started. So the first thing you want to do once you create a platformer level is to go into the settings and make sure the game type actually says platformer, or else we won't be able to have a platformer mode. So next, the sync doesn't really matter in a platformer since you're going to be going up and down, left and right at your own speed. So I would recommend that you choose a song that acts as like ambience or background. I chose here just Within the Sadness, which is a nice little kind of like rainy day type song that's also pretty long, giving the player more than enough time to complete our platformer. So the first thing we can do is when we load into the platformer, you can't really go past this line, and so all of our building's going to occur to the right of this white line. So the first thing we might want to do in our platformer level is to not spawn right here. So let's say we want to spawn in the air, so you can have, like, for example, the tunnel animation that you see in the sewers. So all you have to do to create an effect that basically makes you spawn in the air is just place any object where you want the spawn to occur. Let's say we want it to happen right here, sounds good. And then we give it a group ID. So now it has group ID 1, and we can go into the settings, go into options, and where it says spawn group, we can set spawn group to 1. And now when we press play, we spawn on top of that. And we can even move it over here, and we'll spawn on top of that. So basically, you can set the spawn to wherever you want by creating an object, giving it a group ID, and then setting that spawn group in the options. And now we will spawn there. You get the point. So let's now create, let's say, a platform of just basic blocks. Again, no cool decoration we're going to do. We're just going to create some blocks. So now let's just create something like this in either direction and put some spikes on the bottom so the player can't jump down there. So now I've created this platformer gameplay here, just a short couple of jumps with some spikes on the bottom. Now let's say we want the player to be able to place a checkpoint, let's say right about here. So we place this checkpoint option, which is in the orbs section on the very end. Now to edit the checkpoint, you press Edit Special, and of course make it a touch trigger so that when the player touches the checkpoint, they actually get it. So make sure to make it a touch trigger. I'm pretty sure it's touch trigger by default, so you don't have to worry about that. Goodbye, doggy. This spawn ID will trigger a specific group whenever the checkpoint is touched. For example, let's say we want the player to not be able to go past here if they don't have the checkpoint. So what we can do is we can mark these objects as group 2. So we're going to set the spawn ID to 3. And then we'll create, let's say, a move trigger. And this move trigger will be group 3. So basically, when we hit this, it's going to trigger 3. That's going, and make sure to mark this as spawn trigger. That basically tells the game that it will be triggered by this. So this is group 3. This will be triggered, and what do we want it to trigger? We want it to trigger group 2, which are these blocks. What do we want them to do? Let's say we can move them up. So now what will happen is that the player will be like, wow, I can't go past these blocks. But if I do the checkpoint, then it moves up just like so. So basically what you do, just to recap, you'll set the spawn ID to a certain number, set your trigger to that number, then set the trigger to the number of the things you want to do stuff to on that trigger, that target group ID. And again, you can edit the move triggers like any way you want. Let's say that's not, let's say we want it to be more slow. We can just make it like that. And now it will move a lot slower up. Let's say we want it to have an easing animation. You can do whatever you want. And now it goes up like that. Okay, let's say that this checkpoint, we don't want the player to respawn on this checkpoint. Let's say we want it to respawn on where the move trigger is. Let's say we want it to respawn up there. All we have to do is the move trigger already has a group ID. It's 3. So what we can do is go to the checkpoint, Edit Special, and target the position of 3. This makes it so that when you hit the checkpoint and you die, actually, I'll have to go into actually playing the platformer here. That makes it so that we hit the checkpoint and we die, and we'll respawn where that move trigger is. And now when we respawn, make sure to mark that. In my specific case, I had to mark this trigger as a multi-trigger, so it would constantly bring this thing up. But that's basically what you can do with the respawn target position. That's what it does. You'll respawn on a specific object. You can also do the same thing with respawn ID. This basically makes something it's the same thing as spawn ID, but instead of when you touch the checkpoint, it's when you respawn on the checkpoint, and that is when that event is triggered. Okay, let's say we want to add a check to see if the player actually hit this yellow orb, or basically just an animation. Let's make this saw. So this saw will block the player from going to the next section. We want to toggle this saw whenever the player hits the yellow orb. So let's create an event trigger, and let's put it right here. You want to be sure it is loaded in basically before the event happens, and we're going to make it trigger group ID 4. So this is going to activate anything with the group ID of 4. And we want to pick yellow orb. Okay, so now we have that, and it's triggering 4. So we need to create a toggle trigger, and we're going to give this toggle trigger group ID 4. Now the toggle trigger itself is going to trigger the saw. We'll give that group ID 5. So let's be sure to add group ID 5 to the saw. Let's make some walls of saws. Okay, so now we have some saws with group ID of 5. So basically, the event loads in and it says, okay, I will toggle anything that has group ID 4 whenever a yellow orb is hit. The toggle trigger here has group ID 4. It will activate whenever this toggle trigger is hit. However, there is one thing you want to do, and you need to mark it as spawn triggered. This means that it will only trigger if it is triggered by external things like the event trigger. Next, if you have multiple yellow orbs and you want the event to happen multiple times, you can turn on multi-trigger, but in my case, I'm not going to have to use it multiple times. So we load into our platformer, hit that checkpoint, moves up. Okay, cool. So now we're here, and it's like, okay, I don't see anywhere I can get, but we hit the yellow orb and the saws disappear. You can do anything like that. You can do move triggers, for example. I'll show what that looks like right now. Let's say you want the saws to move out of the frame, just move up, and we want to target the saws, give it 4, make sure it is spawn triggered. So now when we go into our platformer, let's go over here, and now the saws move up out of the way. Okay, here in my level I have a certain contraption kind of set up that will recreate the geometry dash part in Dash, where the camera will zoom in and time will appear to slow down. So basically what I have set up here is a red pad. This triggers an event trigger, red pad. And I'm triggering group ID 6 because that's what I had next to be free. So I set up a zoom, which makes sure to mark all these as spawn triggers if you're going to use an event trigger. Next, we mark the zoom as group ID 6 and the time warp, which I set to 25% speed, as group ID 6. Now the player will jump up here and they will hit a yellow portal, which is actually out of frame because of the zoom trigger. Next, I have resetting camera functions. Basically, it sets the time warp to 1, which is normal, and the zoom to 1, which is also normal, and I have both of these touch triggered, so if the player hits these, it will then reset the camera frame. In fact, I can even copy and paste these across the board here in case the player decides to move during the animation. Let's see what that looks like. So here I am, and once I hit that red pad, it's going to start, so let's see what it looks like. I zoom in, time slows down, and once I hit those triggers, I'm back to normal. Let's say we want to add a sound effect as well when the red pad gets hit. Well, there are two ways to do this. First of all, you could simply just add a sound effect trigger that will trigger whenever your player lines up with here, but in case you want to tie it to the actual red pad, you can add that group ID that the event is triggering and make it spawn triggered. Next, we can just select any of these sound effects here, which, by the way to do this is just add a sound effects trigger and place it wherever you want, edit object, and hit the 3 lines. Let's go with impacts and hits. Let's go with explosion impact, sure. And we can use that, and then we can simply all modify it so it sounds a little bit louder than normal. Let's go with that. And of course, let's make it sound a little bit higher. All right, let's see. And we can hear the sound effect. All right, I added on a couple of things to show you how the point system works. So we can add a item pickup in the potion looking type thing. I'm using this object right here, and what we can do is we can place it. I just placed it a little bit hidden right here, and when you click edit special, you can make it a pickup item, and you can also make it worth a certain amount of points. I made it worth 5 points, and then what you can do is you can add one of these counters. The way to get to that is you go to trigger and you pick the thing that says 0. Then you can click on that object and hit Edit Special. This is a counter label. You can make it count the item IDs, which we saw earlier. You can make it count this, or you could just make it count the amount of points the player has, which is what I decided to do. As you can see, we have points here. So now, when I go into the platformer, and I have a start position, and we collect this point, and we jump here, it activates our red pad animation from before, and now we have 5 points. Okay, what happens if I don't collect it? Well, if I don't collect it, I have 0 points. But luckily, I can go back, and I can go ahead and try to collect that. And as you can see, we have 5 points now. Alright, next if we want to have a coin that will activate once we pick up this, as you can see, I have a coin here. If I just delete this toggle trigger, it's right there. But basically, the coin is group 7 I gave it, and we have the toggle trigger here, which disables that group. So now our coin is completely unreachable. So how do we fix that? Well, our item here, our coin here is item ID 1. You can give it whatever you want, but I just kept it 1 for now. And so we can assign it points, which can, again, display on this little counter here. But mainly what we're looking for is our count trigger. This count trigger basically tracks a specific item ID. In our case, that's going to be 1. Then what it does is it checks for a specific count. In our case, that's going to be 1. Even though we gave it 5 points, that's just sort of a cosmetic thing. Every time you pick up an item, it just counts as 1 item for every one that you pick up. So we technically have 1. So we set the count trigger and we say the target is 1. So once the target hits 1, it's going to do something to target ID 7, which is our coin. In our case, we can deactivate it or we can activate it. I want to activate it. That's what we want to do. We want to turn the coin on. So basically what happens here, as you can see on this platform, our coin is nowhere to be found. So let's go back and collect this coin. So if we collect the coin and then jump, let's go jump over to where the coin should be, and there's nothing there because we haven't picked up the mini coin yet. We collect that, we hit this, and as you could have seen, there's our coin right there, and we can collect it. Now you can of course add some cosmetics by building maybe like a cage around where the coin would be to showcase where the coin is, but in my case that's just simply how you can show a coin. Now of course we can also add a time trigger on the player spawn. Let's go ahead and put it directly on where that player will spawn. That's good enough. Edit object, let's make it a touch trigger. And basically we can start and stop the timer, and we will go ahead and stop it at, let's say, 49.53 seconds. So target ID is spawned when stop time is hit. So basically this will activate a spawn trigger. So I'll make it, let's go 10. So now what we can do is we can have another coin here. We have another coin here. We'll give it 8. We want it to be toggled if group ID 10 is triggered. So we make it spawn triggered and group ID 8. So now what we can do is let me delete my start position. Let's go ahead and try my platformer level. So we go around here, we get that, all fun and games. All right, let's collect this coin real quick. And just like that, we have the coins. Actually, what I'm going to do is I'm also going to put a little timer counter here so we can actually see how much time has elapsed. And as you can see, I can collect this coin, and we have a timer above the second coin, which you can do to basically set a timer like what they have on the first level of the tower where you have to complete it within 50 seconds. Just set that stop time on the time trigger to whatever you want. If you want it to be 10 seconds, which would be impossible for me, then you can do that. But you get the point, you can make a timer with that and use the counter to display that timer. Alright, finally the most important part to any level is to add an end. So what we can do here is add an end trigger. Okay, now for the end trigger will basically pull you in if you don't change anything about it. So what you can first do is you can also set up an end trigger to be touch or spawn triggered. So if it's spawn triggered, then it doesn't really matter where in the level you put it, but if you make it a touch trigger, but you don't want to, let's say, pull the player into that location, for example, if we want to end it right here and make it touch triggered, you can also set the target position to this apple here, which I have as group ID 11, so it will center the ending animation on top of that apple. But basically you can just make it touch triggered if you want to make it be triggered by a spawn trigger or a certain event, for example a count trigger. When you collect all the coins you can also do that. There are really infinite amount of ways to set up the end trigger. Again, if it's spawn triggered, it doesn't actually have to be anywhere, and for some reason there's a multi-trigger on it, even though when you end the level it's the end, so I'm not sure why that's there, but you can make it instantly pull you in, no effects, no sound effects, generic stuff like that. But yeah, that's basically how you use the end trigger to end your platformer level. Like those two, and just like that, we end the level once we touch it. And that's basically how you can make your own platformer level, the basics behind it. I showed basic camera movement, how to create some coins and pickup triggers, and of course how to end the level. If you found this tutorial helpful, please like and subscribe. Thank you for watching.
Walking on fighting side of me.
That don't look like it.
It don't. It don't go down.
Robert, it goes down.
No, it don't.
It do go down.
Oh!